The Assembly will come to order. Chief Clerk, call the roll.
Assemblywoman Anderson, Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson, Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod, Assemblywoman Black, Assemblywoman Brown May, Assemblywoman Carlton, Assemblywoman Cohen, Assemblywoman Considine, Assemblywoman Dickman, Assemblywoman Duran, Assemblyman Ellison, Assemblyman Flores, Assemblywoman Gonzalez, Assemblywoman Gorlow, Assemblyman Hafen, Assemblywoman Hanson, Assemblywoman Hardy, Assemblywoman Howdigi, Assemblywoman Kasama, Assemblywoman Krasner, Assemblyman Levitt, Assemblywoman Martinez, Assemblywoman Marzola, Assemblyman Matthews, Assemblyman MacArthur, Assemblywoman Brittany Miller, Assemblyman C.H. Miller, Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno, Assemblywoman Wynn, Assemblyman O'Neill, Assemblyman Ortlicker, Assemblywoman Peters, Assemblyman Roberts, Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong, Assemblywoman Thomas, Assemblywoman Titus, Assemblywoman Tolles, Assemblywoman Torres, Assemblyman Watts, Assemblyman Wheeler, Assemblyman Yeager, Speaker Frierson.
Here, Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May the record reflect that all members are present.
The record shall so reflect there are 42 members present. There is a quorum. The Assembly will please rise for the prayer by Rabbi Benjamin Zober of the Temple Sinai in Reno.
Ribono shel olam, ruler of the universe, may those who guide our state be constantly mindful of our mission to stand as exemplars of justice, protectors of the weak, foes of unrighteousness, lovers of peace. So imbue all with these ideals that our state may stand as refuge for those oppressed, sanctuary of liberty, haven of peace. May your blessing rest on this holy place of liberty. May your blessings rest upon the legislators, upon all those entrusted with guardianship of our rights. May peace and good thrive in our state. May blessings spread among us. And together we say, Amen.
Please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Order of Business 2, reading and approval of the journal.
Carson City, Monday, April
Mr.
12.
Speaker.
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to dispense with further reading of the journal and authorize the Speaker and Chief Clerk to make necessary corrections or additions.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Go to Order of Business 4, reports to standing committees.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Commerce and Labor, to which will refer to Assembly Bills 51, 130, 190, has had the same under consideration and begs leave to report the same back with the recommendation and do pass as amended. And your Committee on Commerce and Labor, to which will refer to Assembly Bills 177, 250, has had the same under consideration and begs leave to report the same back with the recommendation and do pass as amended. Mr. Speaker, your Committee on Education, to which will refer to Assembly Bills 68, 247, 261, 319, has had the same under consideration and begs leave to report the same back with recommendation amended do pass as amended. Shannon Bilbray, Axelrod, Chair. Mr. Speaker, your Committee on Government Affairs, to which will refer to Assembly Bills 338, 357, 362, 365, has had the same under consideration and begs leave to report the same back with recommendation do pass. And your Committee on Government Affairs, to which will refer to Assembly Bills 52, 143, 186, 325, 437, has had the same under consideration and begs leave to report the same back with recommendation and do pass as amended. And your Committee on Government Affairs, to which was referred Assembly Bill 131, has had the same under consideration and begs leave to report the same back with recommendation without recommendation and re-referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. Edgar Flores, Chair. Mr. Speaker, your Committee on Health and Human Services, to which will refer to Assembly Bills 273, 344, has had the same under consideration and begs leave to report the same back with recommendation and do pass as amended. And your Committee on Health and Human Services, to which was referred Assembly Bill 351, has had the same under consideration and begs leave to report the same back with recommendation without recommendation. Resolution, Rochelle T. Wynn, Chair. Mr. Speaker, Committee on Judiciary, to which will refer to Assembly Bills 830, 33, 37, 43, 59, 104, 113, 125, 160, 212, 230, 237, 241, 284, 393, 394, 401, 403, has had the same under consideration and begs leave to report the same back with a recommendation then do pass as amended. Steve Yeager, Chair. Mr. Speaker, your Committee on Revenue, to which was referred to Assembly Bill 69, has had the same under consideration and begs leave to report the same back with a recommendation to amend and do pass as amended. Leslie E. Cohen, Chair.
Go to order business 7, messages from the Senate.
Senate Chamber, Carson City, April 12, 2021. To the Honorable the Assembly, I have the honor to inform the Honorable Body that the Senate on this day passed Senate Bills 32, 161, 248, 249, 362, and I have the honor to inform the Honorable Body that the Senate on this day passed as amended Senate Bills 14, 38, 68, 141, and I have the honor to inform the Honorable Body that the Senate on this day passed Senate Joint Resolutions 11, 12. Sherry Rodriguez, Assistant Secretary of the Senate.
We go to order business 8, Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under Order Business 8, I move that all bills reported out of committee be immediately placed on second reading through April 20th, 2021.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Assembly Bill 214 be withdrawn from your Committee on Ways and Means.
You've heard that motion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Assembly Bill 118 be taken from its place on general file and be placed on the Chief Clerk's desk.
You've heard that motion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Still on order business 8.
Assembly Joint Resolution 1, introduced by Assemblyman Titus et al., Senators Hardy et al., proposing to amend the Nevada Constitution to add and revise terms relating to persons with certain conditions for whose benefit certain public institutions are supported by the state. Resolved that this resolution becomes effective upon passage. End of resolution.
Are there any amendments to the resolution?
There are none.
Remarks. Assemblywoman Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Joint Resolution 1 proposes to amend Section 1 of Article 13 of the Nevada Constitution by replacing the description of persons who benefit from institutions fostered and supported by the state from 1, insane, to persons with significant mental illness, and 2, blind, to persons who are blind or visually impaired, and 3, deaf and dumb, to persons who are deaf or hard of hearing, or persons who have an intellectual or developmental disability. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any further remarks? Seeing none, the Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. Bill 11 received the constitutional majority. Declare it passed. This resolution is ordered transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Joint Resolution 2, introduced by the Committee on Natural Resources, recognizing that forest health and water quality are inextricably linked. Resolved that this resolution becomes effective upon passage. End of resolution.
Are there any amendments to the resolution?
I have amendment number 119, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources.
Assemblyman Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment 119 to Assembly Joint Resolution 2.
Assemblyman Watts has moved that the Assembly adopt Amendment 119 to Assembly Joint Resolution number 2. Remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amendment adds language concerning rangeland and soil health, the quantity of water, and the effects of climate change, and further encourages collaboration with conservation districts, land managers, private landowners, and land users.
Are there any further remarks? All those in favor of the Assembly adopting Amendment 119 to Assembly Joint Resolution number 2 signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion passes. Members adopted. Any further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Those ordered to resolution.
Assembly Joint Resolution 7, introduced by Assemblyman Bilbray Axelrod et al., Senators Brooks et al., urging the Congress of the United States to pass the National Infrastructure Bank Act of 2020. Resolved that this resolution becomes effective upon passage. End of resolution.
Are there any amendments to the resolution?
There are none.
Remarks? Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod.
Can you hear me? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Joint Resolution 7 urges Congress of the United States to pass the National Infrastructure Bank Act of 2020, also known as H.R. 6422 of the 116th Congress. This will offer long-term financing of infrastructure projects, business and economic growth, and the creation of new jobs.
Any further remarks? There being none, Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 36 ayes, 6 nays. The resolution, having received the constitutional majority, declared passed and ordered transmitted to Senate.
Assembly Joint Resolution Number 10, introduced by Assemblyman Watts et al., Senators Harris et al., proposing to amend the ordinance of the Nevada Constitution and the Nevada Constitution to remove language authorizing the use of slavery and involuntary servitude as a criminal punishment. Resolved that this resolution becomes effective upon passage. End of resolution.
Are there amendments to the resolution?
There are none.
Remarks? Assemblyman Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Joint Resolution 10 proposes to amend both the ordinance of the Nevada Constitution and the Nevada Constitution itself to remove language authorizing the use of slavery and involuntary servitude as a criminal punishment.
Any further remarks? There being none, the Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. The resolution, having received the constitutional majority, declared passed and ordered transmitted to Senate.
Senate Joint Resolution 11, introduced by Senator Spearman, urging Congress to ratify the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Resolved that this resolution becomes effective upon passage.
Are there any amendments to the resolution? Oh, this is an introduction. I got off my agenda. Assemblywoman Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that SJR 11 be referred to your Committee on Legislative Operations and Elections.
Without objection, so referred.
Senate Joint Resolution 12, introduced by the Committee on Growth and Infrastructure, expressing the priority of the timely completion of the Tahoe East Shore Trail Extension Project and urging Congress to provide federal funding for completion of the project.
Assemblyman Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that SJR 12 be referred to your Committee on Natural Resources.
Without objection, so referred. Go to Order of Business 9, Introduction, First Reading, Reference to Bill.
Senate Bill 14, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, an act relating to emergency management, revising requirements relating to the distribution by the Division of Emergency Management of the Department of Public Safety of a written guide to assist a person or governmental entity required to file certain emergency response plans, expanding the types of services regarding which certain utilities are required to develop and submit vulnerability assessments and emergency response plans, requiring certain state agencies to coordinate with the Division of Emergency Management to annually compile a list of each utility and provider of new electric resources required to submit a vulnerability report and emergency response plan, and providing other matters properly relating thereto. Senate Bill 32, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, an act relating to offenders, revising provisions governing certain programs of treatment for offenders established by the Director of the Department of Corrections, and providing other matters properly relating thereto. Senate Bill 38, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, an act relating to legal services, establishing certain provisions applicable to pro bono contracts for legal services entered into by the Attorney General or any other officer, agency, or employee in the executive department of the state government, requiring the Attorney General to prepare and submit an annual report concerning such contracts and providing other matters properly relating thereto. Senate Bill 68, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, an act relating to public financial administration, revising provisions governing the investment of certain money held by the state, increasing the maximum amount of money the state treasurer is authorized to transfer from the state permanent school fund to a corporation for public benefit to provide private equity funding to certain businesses, revising provisions governing the guarantee of bonds of school districts with money from the state permanent school fund, and providing other matters properly relating thereto. Assembly Bill 141, introduced by Senator Brooks, an act relating to public works, revising provisions relating to the scope of horizontal construction and vertical construction for certain purposes, removing the prospective expiration of provisions relating to construction managers at risk, and providing other matters properly relating thereto. Assembly Bill 161, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, an act relating to criminal justice, eliminating the advisory committee to study laws concerning sex offender registration, transferring the committee's duties to the Advisory Commission on the Administration of Justice, and providing other matters properly relating thereto. Senate Bill 248, introduced by Senator Dondero Loop, an act relating to collection agencies, requiring a collection agency to notify a debtor before taking any action to collect a medical medical debt, prohibiting certain practices relating to the collection of medical debt, and providing other measures for reviewing thereto. Senate Bill 249, introduced by Senator Don Darrell Loop, an act relating to education requiring the Board of Trustees of a school district or the governing body of a charter school to include certain information on an identification card issued to a pupil, requiring a pupil to be excused from attendance at a public school for behavioral health reasons in certain circumstances, providing that a qualified mental health professional or behavioral health professional can provide a certificate to excuse a pupil from attendance at school, and providing other measures properly named thereto. Senate Bill 362, introduced by the Committee on Growth and Infrastructure, an act relating to public transit, revising provisions governing the provision of certain services as part of a public transit system, and providing other measures properly named thereto.
Assemblywoman Dennison Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Senate Bills 14, 32, 38, 68, 141, 161, 248, 249, and 362 be referred to the committees as shown on the Assembly Bill introductions dated April 13, 2021, of which all members have a copy of on their desk.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Go to order of business 11, second reading amendments. Are we?
Assembly Bill 460, introduced by the Committee on Ways and Means.
Oh, we skipped one?
An act making an appropriation to the Division of Museum and History of the Department of Tourism and Cultural Affairs to restore a school bus program to reimburse transportation costs for public school students to visit state museums, and providing other measures properly named thereto.
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Assembly Bill 460 be referred to your Committee on Ways and Means.
Without objection, so referred.
Mr. Speaker, order business 8.
Order business 8.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that all bills reported out of committee today, April 13, 2021, be referred to second reading for the next legislative day.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. So we're going to back to 11.
Assembly Bill 4, introduced by the Committee on Commerce and Labor, an act relating to insurance, revising provisions governing the authority and duties of the Nevada Insurance Guarantee Association, the Board of Directors of the Association, and the Commissioner of Insurance, revising provisions governing claims against and actions and proceedings involving insolvent insurers in the association, revising provisions governing the plan of operation of the association and subrogation and recovery by the association, revising the immunity from liability for certain persons with regard to activities related to the association and insolvent insurers, and providing other measures properly named thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 18, end of Section 18, end of bill.
On the amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole.
I have Amendment 10, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Commerce and Labor.
Assemblywoman Howdiggy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment Number 10 to Assembly Bill Number 4.
Assemblywoman Howdiggy has moved that the Assembly adopt Amendment 10 to Assembly Bill 4. Remarks?
The amendment provides that the Nevada Insurance Guarantee Association is not bound by a settlement entered into within the 12-month period before an order of liquidation, only if the settlement has not yet been funded.
Any further remarks? All those in favor of the Assembly adopt Amendment 10 to Assembly Bill 4 signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Any further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bill's ordered general file.
Assembly Bill 6, introduced by the Committee on Natural Resources, an act relating to water, revising provisions governing an application for a temporary change relating to water already appropriated, and providing other matters properly named thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
On the amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole.
I have Amendment 118, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources.
Assemblyman Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment 118 to Assembly Bill 6.
Assemblyman Watts has moved that the Assembly adopt Amendment 118 to Assembly Bill 6. Remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amendment provides that a person may file a written protest against the granting of an application for a temporary change, and that the state engineer may hold a hearing in accordance with the procedures set forth in existing law.
Any further remarks? All those in favor of the Assembly adopt Amendment 118 to Assembly Bill 6 signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Any further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bill's ordered general file.
Assembly Bill 18, introduced by the Committee on Commerce and Labor, an act relating to insurance, revising provisions governing policies of insurance covering the use of a passenger car, revising provisions governing the renewal of a policy of insurance, revising provisions governing certain policies of motor vehicle liability insurance, and providing other matters properly named thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 3, end of Section 3, end of bill.
On the amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole.
I have Amendment Number 11, proposed proposed by the Assembly Committee on Commerce and Labor.
Assemblywoman Howdiggy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment Number 11 to Assembly Bill 18.
Assemblywoman Howdiggy has moved the Assembly adopt Amendment 11 to Assembly Bill 18. Remarks?
The amendment deletes Section 1 of the bill, which authorizes an insurer who offers a liability insurance policy covering the use of a passenger car to offer uninsured and underinsured motorist coverage in amounts greater or less than the amount of the limits of coverage for bodily injury provided by the policy.
Any further remarks? All those in favor of the Assembly adopt Amendment 11 to Assembly Bill 18 signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Amendments adopted. Any further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered general file.
Assembly Bill 19, introduced by the Committee on Education, an act relating to education revising the academic subjects that constitute social studies, exempting standards of content and performance for courses of study in public schools from certain requirements governing the adoption of regulations and providing other matters properly thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 6, end of Section 6, end of bill.
Are the amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Bills ordered general file.
Assembly Bill 31, introduced by the Committee on Natural Resources, an act relating to substances regulated by the State Department of Agriculture, requiring the State Board of Agriculture to adopt standards for diesel exhaust fluid, prohibiting certain commercial activities relating to diesel exhaust fluid in certain circumstances, transferring the duty to adopt standards for aviation fuel from the State Sealer of Consumer Equitability to the Board, requiring the Board to adopt standards for petroleum heating products not involving liquefied petroleum gas and natural gas, revising provisions relating to the storage and disposal of petroleum products, eliminating certain powers and duties of the State Sealer of Consumer Equitability relating to petroleum products, and providing other matters properly thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 16, end of Section 16, end of bill.
Are the amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 18, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources.
Assemblyman Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment 18 to Assembly Bill 31.
Assemblyman Watts has moved that the Assembly adopt Amendment 18 to Assembly Bill 31. Remarks?
Thank you. The amendment makes it unlawful for any person to refuse to permit the State Sealer of Consumer Equitability or any member of the Nevada Highway Patrol to perform their duties set forth in NRS 590.100 and allows by mutual agreement for the waiver of the 24-hour notice period before an outlet or tank which has been sealed to be unsealed for purposes of removal of fuel or other product found to be in violation.
Any further remarks? All those in favor of the Assembly adopt Amendment 18 to Assembly Bill 31 signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Amendments adopted. Any further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered general file.
Assembly Bill 34, introduced by the Committee on Natural Resources, an act relating to pest control, defining the term control as it applies to control of noxious weeds by the owner or operator of land, authorizing the Director of the State Department of Agriculture to adopt regulations that establish and administer a program to certify certain agricultural products as being free from propagated parts from which noxious weeds may grow, authorizing certain notices to be delivered by electronic mail, exempting certain businesses that sell nursery stock only to the public exclusively via the Internet from certain licensure requirements, revising the prohibition against engaging in certain activities involving pest control without a license, revising provisions governing the certification of persons to apply or supervise the application of restricted use pesticides, and providing other matters properly thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 26, end of Section 26, end of bill.
Are the amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 24, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources.
Assemblyman Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment 24 to Assembly Bill 34.
Assemblyman Watts has moved that the Assembly adopt Amendment 24 to Assembly Bill 34. Remarks?
Thank you. The amendment clarifies provisions concerning the certification and application process for certain agricultural products, noxious weeds, and pesticides, and removes the Director of the State Department of Agriculture's authority to establish and collect a reasonable fee for the weed-free certification program.
Any further remarks? All those in favor of the Assembly adopt Amendment 24 to Assembly Bill 34 signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Amendments adopted. Any further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered general file.
Assembly Bill 40, introduced by the Committee on Natural Resources, an act relating to storage tanks, revising provisions governing the responsibility for discharges from certain storage tanks, revising the requirements relating to the eligibility of a storage tank for the coverage of certain costs from the Fund for Cleaning Up Discharges of Petroleum, and providing other matters properly thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 9, end of Section 9, end of bill.
All right, amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole.
I have Amendment 68, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources.
Assemblyman Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment 68 to Assembly Bill 40.
Assemblyman Watts has moved that the Assembly adopt Amendment 68 to Assembly Bill 40. Remarks?
Thank you. The amendment authorizes the distribution of additional amounts from the Fund for Cleaning Up Discharges of Petroleum to cover the cost of cleaning up those discharges.
Any further remarks? All those in favor of the Assembly adopt Amendment 68 to Assembly Bill 40 signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Amendment is adopted. Any further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered general file.
Assembly Bill 412, introduced by the Committee on Growth and Infrastructure, and Act related to motor vehicles, revising provisions governing fully autonomous vehicles and providing other measures properly relating thereto. The people's state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 5, end of Section 5, end of bill.
On amendments to section 1 of the bill as a whole.
There are none.
Bills ordered general file.
Assembly Bill 415, introduced by the Committee on Education, and Act relating to education, directing Legislative Committee on Education to conduct an interim study of the statewide system of accountability for public schools and providing other measures properly relating thereto. The people's state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
On amendments to section 1 of the bill as a whole.
There are none.
Bills ordered general file. We will now go to order of business 12, general file and third reading. Assemblywoman Carlton, you get order of business 8.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, under order of business number 8, I would move that Assembly Bill 40 and Assembly Bill 415, currently on second reading, be referred to your Committee on Ways and Means.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Back to order of business 12, general file and third reading.
Assembly Bill 2, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs and Act related to public bodies, revising provisions relating to the prohibition against gubernatorial appointees serving simultaneously on more than one board, commission, or similar body, and providing other matters properly relating thereto. The people's state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 4, end of Section 4, end of bill.
And amendments to section 1 of the bill as a whole.
There are none.
Remarks? Assemblyman Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 2 allows the gubernatorial appointee to serve on up to 3 boards, commissions, or similar bodies. The bill is effective upon passage and approval.
Any further remarks? There being none, Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. Bill having received the Constitution majority, declare passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 14, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs and Act relating to emergency management, revising the requirements regarding the frequency of meetings of the Nevada Resilience Advisory Committee, the Nevada Tribal Emergency Coordinating Council, and the State Disaster Identification Coordination Committee, revising provisions relating to the reporting by a provider of health care of certain information regarding the treatment of certain persons to the State Disaster Identification Coordination Committee, revising the duties of the State Disaster Identification Coordination Committee, and providing other matters properly relating thereto. The people's state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 7, end of Section 7, end of bill.
All right, amendments to section 1 of the bill as a whole.
There are none.
Remarks? Assemblyman Ellison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 14 changes the required frequency to meetings of the Nevada Advisory Committee, the Nevada Tribal Emergency Coordinating Council, and the State Disaster Identification Coordination Committee. This bill also removed the requirement that the State Disaster Identification Coordinator Committee or a subcommittee therefore perform certain duties upon activation. Finally, the bill makes certain reports submitted to the provider of the health care to the State Disaster Identification Coordinating Committee. During the state emergency declaration, the disaster or public health emergency or the health event. This bill comes effective upon the passage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any further remarks? There being none, Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. Bill having received the Constitution majority, declare passed, order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 17, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary and Act relating to convicted persons, eliminating the distinction between an honorable discharge and a dishonorable discharge from probation or parole, and providing other matters properly relating thereto. The people's state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 7, end of Section 7, end of bill.
And amendments to section 1 of the bill as a whole.
There are none.
Remarks? Assemblywoman Gonzalez.
Assembly Bill 17 eliminates the distinction between an honorable discharge and a dishonorable discharge in provisions governing parole and probation. This bill also eliminates the distinction between honorable discharge and dishonorable discharge for purposes of collecting and reporting certain information to the Nevada Sentencing Commission. Thank you.
Further remarks? Assemblywoman Kasama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to AB 17. This bill eliminates the distinction between an honorable discharge and a dishonorable discharge from probation and parole. I and criminal justice organizations oppose this bill because it removes the layer of accountability for the person under supervision. The distinction between an honorable and a dishonorable discharge motivates good behavior and successful readjustment back to becoming a productive and respectful member of society. Removing this distinction takes away one of the incentives in the criminal justice system for rehabilitation, and for this reason, I urge my colleagues to vote no on AB 17. Thank you.
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe that those comments were under Order Business 15.
We'll make them under Order Business 15. Sorry. Any further remarks? There being none, Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 26 ayes, 16 nays. Bill item C, the Constitution majority, declared passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 21, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs and Accumulating Confidential Information, authorizing a person for whom a fictitious address is issued by the Division of Child and Family Services of the Department of Health and Human Services to request a county recorder or county assessor to maintain certain personal information in a confidential manner, revising the personal information that must be maintained in a confidential manner when such a person is a registered voter, authorizing such a person to request the Department of Motor Vehicles display an alternate address on the person's driver's license, commercial driver's license, or identification card, and providing other matters properly named thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 7, end of Section 7, end of bill.
On the amendment to Section 1 of the bill as a whole.
There are none.
Remarks. Assemblywoman Brown-May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 21 authorizes a person for whom a fictitious address has been issued by the Division of Child and Family Services of the Department of Health and Human Services to request a county assessor or county recorder to maintain the personal information of the person contained in their records in a confidential manner without having to obtain a court order. The bill also prohibits the Secretary of State, a county, or city clerk from making personal contact information available.
Any further remarks? There being none, Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 41 ayes, 1 nay. The bill having received the Constitution majority, declare passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 23, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary and Accumulating Criminal Procedure, revising the procedure for the commitment of certain criminal defendants whom the court finds to be incompetent to the custody of the Administrator of the Division of Public and Behavioral Health of the Department of Health and Human Services, and providing other matters properly named thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
On the amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole.
There are none.
Remarks? Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am having trouble with my buttons today. I apologize. Assembly Bill 23 revises the procedure for commitment of certain criminal defendants who are found to be incompetent by the court. The bill requires the Division of Public and Behavioral Health of the Department of Health and Human Services to complete a comprehensive risk assessment within 40 calendar days after the request for assessment is received.
Any further remarks? There being none, Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. The bill having received the Constitution majority, declare passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 25, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary and Accumulating Criminal Procedure, authorizing a forensic facility to transport or request assistance from law enforcement in transporting a person on conditional release to the forensic facility under certain circumstances, and providing other matters properly named thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
Are the amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks? Assemblywoman Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 25 authorizes a forensic facility supervising a person on conditional release to take that person into protective custody and transport him or her to a forensic facility if there is probable cause to believe that the person violated a condition of release and is a danger to himself or herself or others. A forensic facility may also request that a law enforcement agency take a person into protective custody and transport him or her to the forensic facility. Additionally, a court must hold a hearing not later than 3 days after the person is taken into custody to determine whether to continue, modify, or terminate the conditional release of the person. The hearing may be continued not more than 10 days upon agreement by the counsel for the person and by the prosecuting attorney.
Any further remarks? There being none, Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. Bill I the Constitution majority. Declare passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 28, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs and Act relating to state purchasing, imposing an inverse preference on certain bidders for state purchasing contracts and providing the matters properly laid thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 6, end of Section 6, end of bill.
Any members to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Assemblywoman Considine.
Thank you, Speaker. Assembly Bill 28 imposes an inverse preference on any bidder for a state purchasing contract with a principal place of business in another state if, for a similar contract, the other state, 1, grants a preference to a person with a principal place of business in that state, and 2, denies that preference to a person with a principal place of business in the state of Nevada.
Any further remarks? There being none, the Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 40 ayes, 2 nays. Bill the Constitution majority. Declare passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 32, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary and Act relating to motor vehicles, revising provisions relating to the towing or immobilization of a motor vehicle and providing other matters properly laid thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, end of bill.
Are there amendments to Section 1 of the bill?
There are none.
Remarks? Assemblywoman Miller. Assemblyman Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 32 creates a new process for filing a complaint for expedited relief in justice court related to the towing or immobilization of a motor vehicle. If the complaint filed does not meet certain criteria, it must be dismissed by the court without prejudice. The dismissal does not affect the right of the vehicle owner to pursue civil damages. The court will determine if the vehicle was lawfully or unlawfully towed or immobilized and will enter an order declaring who is responsible for certain costs. Upon the presentation of a certified copy of the court order, the person storing the vehicle or the person who immobilized the vehicle must release the vehicle to the owner immediately. The measure also requires the operator of any facility or location where towed vehicles are stored to mail written notice within 24 hours after the towing to the registered owner of the towed vehicle. Thank you.
Any further remarks? There being none, Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. Bill having received the Constitution majority. Declare passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 60, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary and Act relating to witnesses, making provisions of a contract or settlement agreement that prohibit or restrict a party to the contract or settlement agreement from testifying at judicial or administrative proceedings concerning criminal conduct, sexual harassment, discrimination, or retaliation, void and unenforceable under certain circumstances, and providing other matters properly laid thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 3, end of Section 3, end of bill.
Are any members of Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks? Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 60 provides that a provision of a contract or settlement is void and unenforceable if the provision prohibits or restricts the party to the contract or settlement agreement from testifying as a witness at a judicial or administrative proceeding concerning another party to the contract or settlement agreement and his or her commission of a criminal offense, an act of sexual harassment, an act of discrimination based on race, religion, color, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, ancestry, familial status, age, sex by an employer or a landlord, an act of retaliation for reporting such discrimination. Finally, those provisions do not apply to a settlement agreement that results from successful mediation or conciliation by the Nevada Equal Rights Commission. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any further remarks? There being none, Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. Bill having received the Constitution majority. Declare passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 63, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs and Act relating to local financial administration, authorizing a local government to use money from a certain fund to mitigate the effects of certain emergencies and providing other matters properly laid thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, end of bill.
Are there amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Remarks? Assemblyman Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 63 authorizes a local government to use money from its fund established to stabilize the operation of government and mitigate the effects of a natural disaster, to also mitigate the effects of a declared emergency. The bill is effective on October 1st, 2021.
Any further remarks? There being none, Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. Bill having received the constitutional majority, declare passed and order transmitted to Senate.
Assembly Bill 64, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, an act relating to crimes revising the jurisdiction for the prosecution of certain crimes, revising provisions concerning soliciting a child for prostitution, and providing other measures properly relating thereto. The people of the state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 4, end of Section 4, end of bill.
Are there members of Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks, Assemblywoman Krasner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 64 grants the Attorney General concurrent jurisdiction to prosecute a person for committing the crime of facilitating sex trafficking, engaging in prostitution, or solicitation for prostitution. Additionally, the crime of soliciting a child for prostitution is revised. A person is guilty of such a crime if the person solicits a child, a peace officer who is posing as a child, or a person who is assisting an investigation on behalf of peace officers posing as a child.
Any further remarks? There being none, the Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. Bill having received the constitutional majority, declare passed and order transmitted to Senate.
Assembly Bill 75, introduced by the Committee on Natural Resources, an act relating to measurement standards, establishing field reference standards and transfer standards as additional measurement standards, creating a new rebuttable presumption relating to field reference standards, requiring the state sealer of consumer equitability to make available to all users of field reference standards and the transfer standards certain calibration and certification capabilities, requiring the state sealer of consumer equitability to adopt certain regulations for field reference standards and transfer standards, removing the requirement that the state sealer of consumer equitability establish requirements for information relating to open dating of packaged food, revising certain rebuttable presumptions relating to weights, measures, and weighing or measuring devices, and providing other measures properly relating thereto. The people of the state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 11, end of Section 11, end of bill.
Are there members of Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Assemblywoman Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 75 requires a state sealer of consumer equitability, easy to say, to adopt regulations establishing field reference standards to be used in installation, adjustment, repair, or calibration of devices for weights and measures, and weighing and measuring devices, and transfer standards to be used as temporary measurement references to check the accuracy of commercial weighing and measuring equipment. The bill also creates a rebuttable presumption concerning the presence of field reference standard and makes various technical changes concerning weights and measures. It becomes effective upon approval. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any further remarks? There being none, the Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. The bill having received the constitutional majority, declare passed and order transmitted to Senate.
Assembly Bill 76, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs and Act relating to Veterans, authorizing the Director of the Department of Veteran Services to establish and operate programs to provide adult day health care to veterans in certain circumstances, eliminating obsolete requirements concerning the location of veterans' homes, and providing other matters properly relating thereto. The people of the state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
Are there members of Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks, Assemblywoman Dickman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 76 authorizes the Director of the Department of Veterans Services to establish and operate programs to provide adult day health care services to veterans. This service is limited to the extent that federal funding is available. The bill also eliminates certain obsolete requirements governing the location of veterans' homes. This bill is effective upon passage and approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further remarks? There being none, Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. The bill having received the constitutional majority, declare passed and order transmitted to Senate.
Assembly Bill 89, introduced by Assemblyman Titus and Watts, an act relating to wildlife, authorizing the Board of Wildlife Commissioners to establish a program which authorizes a person to transfer his or her tag to hunt a big game mammal to a qualified organization for use by certain persons, authorizing under certain circumstances a family member of a deceased big game hunter to transfer a tag to hunt a big game mammal, and providing other matters properly relating thereto. The people of the state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 5, end of Section 5, end of bill.
Any members of Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Assemblywoman Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 89 authorizes the Board of Wildlife Commissioners or Commission to adopt regulations establishing a program that allows a person to transfer his or her big game tag to a qualified organization for use by a person who is 16 years of age or younger and who is otherwise eligible to hunt or who has a disability or life-threatening medical condition. This bill also authorizes the Commission to establish by regulation a process by which a family member of a deceased big game hunter may transfer the tag to the deceased big game hunter to another person. This bill becomes effective upon passage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any further remarks? There being none, Chief Clerk, open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. The bill having received the constitutional majority, declare passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 100, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs and Act relating to wildfires, authorizing the State Forester Fire Warden to enter into a cooperative agreement with federal, state, and local agencies to create a fire board of directors, revising the duties of the State Forester Fire Warden, creating the Wildland Fire Protection Program, authorizing the Commissioner of Insurance to create an insurance incentive program related to wildfires and providing other means properly laid thereto. The people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 10, end of Section 10, end of bill.
On the amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole.
There are none.
Remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Assemblywoman Black.
Jump the gun. Assembly Bill 100 authorizes the State Forester Fire Warden to enter into a cooperative agreement with federal, state, and local agencies for the purpose of creating a fire board of directors to ensure that agencies in this state work collaboratively on fire suppression activities. The bill also creates the Wildland Fire Protection Program in the Division of Forestry of the State Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, and authorizes the State Forester Fire Warden to enter into cooperative agreements with fire protection districts and boards of county commissioners to participate in the Wildland Fire Protection Program. Finally, the bill authorizes the Commissioner of Insurance to create a program for insurers to provide incentives to promote and encourage property owners to take measures to mitigate the risk of property loss or damage caused by wildfire. This bill is effective July 1st, 2021.
Thank you. Any further remarks? There being none, Chief Clerk, open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. The bill having received the constitutional majority, declare passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 107, introduced by Assemblyman Yeager, an act relating to civil actions, revising the procedure for determining whether a person may prosecute or defend a civil action without paying costs and providing other means properly laid thereto. The people's state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
On the amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole.
There are none.
Remarks? Assemblyman Yeager.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 107 revises the procedure for determining whether a person may prosecute or defend a civil action without paying costs. The person must first file an application, which must include an unsworn declaration, to proceed as an indigent litigant or submit to the court a statement of legal representation. Based on the review of the person's application, the court may allow the person to commend or defend an action without costs and file or issue any necessary writ, process, pleading, or paper without charge. Lastly, criteria are established for the court to use in determining whether to grant such an application.
Any further remarks? There being none, Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 36 ayes, 6 nays. The bill having received the constitutional majority, declare passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 111, introduced by Assemblyman Frierson et al., an act relating to peace officers, revising provisions relating to the membership of the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission and providing other matters properly laid thereto. The people's state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 3, end of Section 3, end of bill.
On the amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole.
There are none.
Remarks? Assemblywoman Considine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 111 adds 2 members to the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission and requires the Majority Leader of the Senate and the Speaker of the Assembly to each appoint 1 member who is not a peace officer and who has demonstrated experience in 1 or more of the following areas: implicit and explicit bias, cultural competency, mental health as it relates to policing and law enforcement, and experience working with certain vulnerable populations. Finally, this bill requires the governor, the majority leader of the Senate, and the Speaker of the Assembly to consider the racial, gender, and ethnic diversity of the commission when making their appointments.
And further remarks? Assemblyman Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of AB 111. This bill will have a long-lasting positive impact on policing in Nevada.
This will be Order of Business 15.
Excuse me, Order of Business 15?
Yeah, Order of Business 15.
All right. So, thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill will have a long-lasting impact on the policing in Nevada. By adding 2 additional citizen stakeholders with varied backgrounds, the Post Commission will be better positioned to guide the training needs of our police officers. Thank you for allowing me to be added as a co-sponsor, and I encourage my colleagues to vote yes on AB 111.
Thank you. Any further remarks? There being none, the Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. Bill the Constitutional majority. Declare passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 138, introduced by Assemblyman Martinez et al., Senators Canizaro et al., and Act relating to public assistance, revising provisions relating to the eligibility of certain convicted persons for public assistance and providing other measures properly thereto. The people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of vote.
On the amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole.
There are none.
Remarks, Assemblywoman Martinez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 138 removes provisions from the statutes that make a person who has been convicted of a felony drug offense ineligible for assistance through the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program or the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance program in the state, thereby authorizing such a convicted person to receive TANF and SNAP benefits. Thank you.
Any further remarks? Assemblywoman Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to AB 138, Order of Business 15.
Oh, thank you. Just trying to get ready. You were on it.
That's okay. This bill, with its conceptual amendment, causes me concern. The conceptual amendment says, regardless of whether the person demonstrates he or she is participating in a successfully completed treatment program or has used or distributed controlled substances since beginning any such treatment program. Those convicted for distributing drugs should complete a substance abuse diversion program before they are subsidized by the taxpayers. I'm opposed to this bill and will be voting no.
Any further remarks? There being none, Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 26 ayes, 16 nays. Bill to the Constitutional majority. Declare passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 157, introduced by Assemblyman Monroe Moreno et al., Senators Harris and Brooks, and Act relating to civil liability, authorizing a person who is the victim of certain discriminatory conduct relating to an incident involving a peace officer to bring a civil action under certain circumstances and providing other matters properly thereto. The people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
On the amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole.
There are none.
Assemblyman Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 157 authorizes a person who is the victim of certain discriminatory conduct relating to an incident involving a peace officer to bring a civil action for damages. Specifically, a civil action may be brought if another person, without reasonable cause and because of the actual or perceived race, color, religion, national origin, physical or mental disability, sexual orientation, or gender identity or expression of the person, knowingly causes a peace officer to respond to a location with the intent to infringe on the constitutional rights of the person, cause the person to feel harassed, humiliated, or embarrassed, cause the person to be removed from a location where he or she is lawfully located, or damage the reputation or economic interest of the person. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Any further remarks? There being none, the Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 36 ayes, 6 nays. Bill to the Constitutional majority. Declare passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 171, introduced by the Committee on Natural Resources, and Act relating to natural resources, providing certain protections for a certain population of Rocky Mountain junipers, providing penalty and providing other matters properly relating thereto. The people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 3, end of Section 3, end of bill.
Now, the amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole.
There are none.
Assemblyman Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 171 declares that it is the policy of the state of Nevada to protect the Spring Valley population of Rocky Mountain junipers, known as swamp cedars, that occur within the Bassa Wabi traditional cultural property in White Pine County. Due to their cultural significance to indigenous peoples, this bill makes it unlawful for any swamp cedar within that property to willfully or negligently be cut, destroyed, mutilated, or removed without first obtaining a special permit from the state forest or fire warden.
Any further remarks? Assemblywoman Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Order of Business 15.
Order of Business 15.
Thank you. I rise in opposition to AB 171. I fully support the intent of this bill in that the swamp cedars are an important Native American cultural resource. I am concerned, however, with the precedent it is setting in that there are countless important natural resources in this great state, many on federal lands. This bill, with its amendment, directs the state forest or fire warden to oversee programs that will protect the Rocky Mountain junipers, also known as swamp cedars, a significant cultural resource. The burden to require the state fire warden to issue a special permit for the taking of every important botanical resource would be too great. Therefore, I will be voting no.
Thank you. Any further remarks? There being none, the chief clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 29 ayes, 13 nays. Bill has received the constitutional majority. Declare passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 236, introduced by Assemblyman Frierson, all Senators Canizaro et al., and relating to the Attorney General, revising provisions governing the qualifications for the office of Attorney General and providing other matters properly relating thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
All right, members of the section will the bill the whole.
There are none.
Assemblywoman Brown-May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 236 revises the eligibility qualifications for the Office of Attorney General by increasing the minimum age required from 25 years to 30 years at the time of an election, increasing the residency requirement from 2 years to 3 years, and adding a requirement that the person be a member of the State Bar of Nevada in good standing.
Any further remarks? There being none, the chief clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 31 ayes, 11 nays. Bill having received the constitutional majority. Declare passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 258, introduced by Assemblywoman Bilber Axelrod, and relating to libraries, revising provisions governing the duties of the trustees of consolidated library districts and providing other matters properly relating thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 3, end of Section 3, end of bill.
All right, members of Section 1 of the bill as a whole.
There are none.
Remarks, Assemblywoman Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. AB 258 requires the trustees of a consolidated library district to appoint an executive director consistent with the statutorily prescribed duties of the trustees of a consolidated library district. The bill also requires the trustees to establish the educational qualifications of the executive director, which may include without limitation holding a master's degree in library and information science, and appoint, evaluate the performance of, and if necessary, dismiss an internal auditor.
Any further remarks? There being none, the chief clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 41 ayes, 1 nay. The bill has received the constitutional majority. Declare passed. Order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 302, introduced by Assemblyman Summers Armstrong et al., and relating to legislative measures, authorizing the Nevada Commission on Minority Affairs to request the drafting of not more than 2 legislative measures for each regular session of the legislature and providing other matters properly relating thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
All right, members of Section 1 of the bill as a whole.
There are none.
Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 302 authorizes the Nevada Commission on Minority Affairs of the Department of Business and Industry to request the drafting of up to 2 legislative measures for each regular session of the legislature that relate to matters within its scope of authority. The bill is effective October 1, 2021.
Any further remarks? Assemblywoman Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Order of Business 15.
Order business 15.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Although I absolutely support them having one bill that they could introduce, sticking with my standard of requesting that this body reduce the overall number of bills, I cannot support 2 bills. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I will be in opposition.
Thank you. Any other remarks? There being none, the chief clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 35 ayes, 7 nays. Bill has received the constitutional majority. Declare passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 304, introduced by Assemblyman Frierson, and relating to law enforcement, revising provisions governing the standards for programs of continuing education for peace officers and providing other matters properly relating thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
Any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks, Assemblywoman Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 304 requires Peace Officers Standards and Training Commission to expand its regulations requiring all peace officers to annually complete not less than 12 hours of continuing education to address crisis intervention as part of topics related to mental health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any further remarks? There being none, the Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 41 ayes, 1 nay. The bill having seen the constitutional majority, declared passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 308, introduced by Assemblyman Fredersen, an act relating to property, revising provisions relating to late fees, revising certain definitions used in the Residential Landlord and Tenant Act, revising provisions relating to notices of increases in rent, and providing other matters properly laid thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 15, end of Section 15, end of bill.
Any members to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks. Assemblywoman Carlton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 308 makes a technical change to revise the term security to security deposit, as that term is used in residential and rental agreements. The measure prohibits a landlord from charging a late fee as long as the rent is paid within 3 calendar days of the due date. The bill extends from 45 to 60 the number of days notice a landlord must provide of a rent increase. For periodic tenancies of less than 1 month, the bill extends from 15 to 30 the number of days notice required.
Thank you. Thank you. Assemblywoman Kasama.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of AB 308, Order of Business 15.
Order of Business 15.
We know that the rental property industry has been hit hard, and I appreciate the Speaker and stakeholders coming together in a bipartisan compromise on this piece of legislation. I will be voting yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Assemblywoman Howdiggy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise in support of Assembly Bill 308. Order of Business 15.
Order of Business 15.
Assembly Bill 308 attempts to further balance the interests of tenants and landlords. Certainly, we are no strangers to the plight of tenants and property owners today. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, the influx of new residents resulting in increased property values caused a shortage of affordable housing throughout the state. Housing continues to be a large percentage of a family's monthly expenses. As Nevada continues to see slower economic recovery as compared to other states across the country, it's critical that we find ways to help tenants adequately prepare for the unexpected while not placing an excessive burden on landlords. AB 308 does just that. I urge my colleagues to support Assembly Bill 308.
Thank you. Any further remarks? There being none, the Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 34 ayes, 8 nays. Bill having received the constitutional majority, declared passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 366, introduced by Assemblywoman Tolles, an act relating to mental health, exempting recordings of certain training activities from requirements concerning the retention, maintenance, and disclosure of health care records, and providing other matters properly laid thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 6, end of Section 6, end of bill.
Are any members to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks. Assemblywoman Tolles.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 366 provides the recording of the provision of services by certain licensed mental health professionals to patients as part of a program of education are exempt from various requirements for the retention, maintenance, and disclosure of health care records if the recording is being used for a training activity, the patient has provided informed consent to the use of the recording in the training activity, and discarding the recording does not result in the maintenance of incomplete patient records. This bill is effective on July 1st, 2021.
Any further remarks? There being none, Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. Bill having received the constitutional majority, declared passed, order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 390, introduced by the Committee on Legislative Operations and Elections, an act relating to elections requiring notice of a contest of an election to be provided to a candidate whose election is being contested, and providing other matters properly laid thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 4, end of Section 4, end of bill.
Are any members to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks? Assemblywoman Miller.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 390 requires that any notice of a contest to an election must also be provided to the candidate whose election is being contested. The person contesting the election must notify the candidate. If the contest is for a candidate of the general election for the office of governors, lieutenant governors, member of the Assembly or the State Senate, Supreme Court Justice, or Appeals Court Judge.
Any further remarks? There being none, Chief Clerk, open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. Bill having received the Constitutional majority, declare pass and order transmitted to Senate.
Assembly Bill 395, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, an act relating to crimes abolishing the imposition of a sentence of death on a person convicted of first-degree murder, amending and repealing related statutes relating or pertaining to the existence, imposition, and execution of a sentence of death upon a person convicted of first-degree murder, reducing the sentence of any person sentenced to death of a sentence of imprisonment for life without the possibility of parole, and providing other matters relating thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 46, end of Section 46, end of bill.
Are the amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks, Assemblyman Yeager.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 395 abolishes the imposition of a sentence of death on a person convicted of first-degree murder. Further, this measure reduces the sentence of any person sentenced to death to a sentence of imprisonment for life without the possibility of parole. Order Business 15.
Order Business 15.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now is the time to end the death penalty in Nevada. The death penalty is broken. Over the past 20 years, efforts to address troubling problems like racial bias, arbitrary and overbroad use, and wrongful convictions of innocent persons have all failed to fix the death penalty. Since the death penalty was reinstated in Nevada in 1976, 189 death sentences have been imposed. More than half of those have been reversed by either state or federal court. Reversals in these complex cases are not only costly and inevitable, they cause victims' family members to relive trauma. Death penalty cases almost always involve decades of litigation, with no guarantee the sentence will ever be carried out. In fact, only one of the 12 executions in the state's history was carried out against the condemned person's will. The other 11 voluntarily gave up their appeals. The death penalty epitomizes concerns about racial injustice in our criminal justice system. Approximately 35% of the people on Nevada's death row are African American, despite accounting for only 8.6% of Nevada's population. More than half of the people on death row are people of color. The death penalty is enormously costly while delivering no result, no greater public safety, no deterrent value, no real closure for victims' family members. The legislative auditor found that each death penalty case, costs more than $500,000 more than a case where the death penalty is not sought. That money could surely be spent better elsewhere, such as education, improved mental health services for Nevadans, or on proactive efforts to prevent crime. The last execution in the state happened 15 years ago. Nevada was unable to carry out an execution just 2 years ago due to the drug companies prohibiting the use of their medications for lethal injection, a right that our courts recognize as valid and legally enforceable. Nothing has changed since then, other than the current stock of drugs inching ever closer to their expiration date. Meanwhile, victims' family members are deprived of the legal finality they are promised and they expect. A death sentence in Nevada means life in prison without the possibility of parole, whatever else we may choose to call it. The death penalty is the epitome of an expensive government program that overpromises and underdelivers. Now is the right time to end our costly, ineffective, and inhumane death penalty. Nevada should join 2/3 of the world's countries who have already banned the death penalty, many of whom have determined that it violates fundamental human rights. Some have concluded that the mere seeking of the death penalty is coercive enough to amount to a form of torture. The government simply should not be in the business of killing. I will conclude with a quote often attributed to Gandhi. Quote, "An eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind." I urge your support of Assembly Bill 395.
Thank you. Assemblywoman Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Order of Business 15.
Order Business 15.
Thank you. On September 2nd, 2011, Alyssa Otremba, just 15 years old, was walking home from borrowing a textbook from a friend. Javier Righetti kidnapped and dragged Alyssa into a desert lot where he sexually assaulted and raped her. Righetti then stabbed Alyssa more than 80 times in her head, neck, and body, then carved an LV for Las Vegas into her thigh because he said it made him feel gangster. During the autopsy, it was discovered that the tip of the knife had broken off in her skull. He returned hours later and poured gasoline on Alyssa's body and lit it on fire. The coroner had to use dental records to identify her, and Alyssa's remains were in such bad condition that her family was advised not to see her because they wouldn't want to remember her like that. Javier Righetti's guilt is not a question. He gave Alyssa Otremba a death sentence. He should get the same. On January 20th, 2008, a college student named Brianna Dennison was kidnapped, raped, and brutally murdered by James Biella, who is currently on Nevada's death row. Her murder was committed just 2 months after Biella brutally raped at gunpoint another college student in a UNR parking garage. Miss Dennison's body, clothed in only socks, was found weeks after the murder in a snow-covered field near a Reno business park under a discarded Christmas tree. She had been smothered with a pillow, raped, and ultimately strangled to death. DNA evidence conclusively proved that Biella was Miss Dennison's killer. He was arrested, tried, convicted, and sentenced to death by a jury. Bree was only 19 years old, with her entire life ahead of her, but James Biella gave her a death penalty. He should get the same, and the sooner the better. In the early morning hours of June 3rd, 1999, Zane Floyd walked into a neighborhood grocery store in Las Vegas and brutally executed 4 innocent Nevadans with a shotgun, including a mentally disabled young man and a 60-year-old grandmother who begged for her life. After his arrest, Mr. Floyd told a detective that he looked right at her and just blew her head apart. One of the police officers who captured Floyd at the scene of the bloody rampage recently wrote me about the incident. Floyd said to him, quote, "I probably shouldn't have done that. She reminded me of my mom." There is no doubt about Mr. Floyd's guilt. He was given a fair trial and sentenced to death by a jury. Considering the circumstances, it was the right and proper sentence. According to the Nevada Department of Corrections, as of March 29, 2021, there were 1,126 convictions for first-degree murder currently in our prisons. Just 6.5% of those prisoners are on death row.
Assemblywoman, if we could try to wind up,
I'm
I'm trying to
done.
be fair
Only
to
the
everyone.
worst of the worst are sentenced to death. That is as it should be, and we should not abolish the death penalty.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. And just for the body's edification, especially when we approach deadlines, we just got to be consistent about the time. I didn't realize you were as close to finish as you were. Thank you. We will go to Assemblywoman Nguyen.
Order of Business 15.
Order of Business 15.
I rise in support of Assembly Bill 395. As many of you know, I work in the justice system, and our justice system, as far as I'm concerned, is the best in the world. But just like any human creation, it is far from perfect. Therefore, the pursuit of justice should never have a result in the permanent taking of a life by the state. The practice doesn't make Nevada any safer. It requires millions of dollars in valuable resources and is a relic of an era where cruel and unusual punishments were commonplace. We have evolved beyond the need for executions, and that act has no place in our society. The unaddressed racial bias in the capital punishment system has disproportionately impacted people of color. Black and brown individuals are more likely to receive a death penalty sentence, and the pervasive racial prejudice in this country's legal system is evident. No one should be sentenced to death while it is an issue that still persists. No one should be sentenced to death when we have imperfections in a human-created system. The argument of the cost-effectiveness of capital punishment versus imprisonment is overplayed and simply wrong. The complex and expensive legal process to seek the death penalty overrides any argument in the cost-effectiveness of this route. The lengthy process also delays justice for victim families and also using up invaluable resources and time that could be used to actually save lives, not end them. I implore my colleagues to vote yes on Assembly Bill 395. Thank you.
Assemblyman Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition of AB 395, Order of Business 15.
Order of Business 15.
Thank you, sir. Okay, today capital punishment is only used sparingly and when evidence is irrefutable and the crime was egregious. Capital punishment is allowed in 27 states and works as a societal deterrent. It's also used many times as a negotiating tool during plea bargains. How many times have you heard of someone saying that we'll take capital punishment off the table if you tell us where those 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bodies are buried so that people can get closure? This is something we're not talking about. This is only sought with the worst of crimes. And no one during the testimony during our committee hearing could explain to me why lethal injection is considered cruel and unusual punishment for death row inmates, but a different or similar type of chemical death is okay for terminally ill patients. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. We must consider the victims, we must consider their families, and in the most extreme cases, we've got to deliver justice for them. I'll be voting no, and I urge my colleagues to do the same.
Thank you. Final, Assemblywoman Anderson.
Order Business 15.
Order Business 15.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to share the words of the past, specifically those of Senator Joe Neal when he was discussing the death penalty in 1977. I do not believe the state should lower itself to the level of its abnormal citizens who, through criminal activity, take human lives. Capital punishment gives the unmistakable message to all society that life ceases to be sacred when it is thought useful to take it, and that violence is legitimate so long as it is thought justified by pragmatic concerns that appeal to those having the power to kill. Reliance on the death penalty obscures the true causes of crime and detracts attention from the effective resources of society to control it. It is a wasteful item of resources, demanding a disproportionate expenditure of time and energy by courts. It burdens the system of criminal justice and is counterproductive as an instrument for society's control of violent crimes. It uniquely epitomizes the tragic inefficiency and brutality of a resort to violence rather than reason for the solution of difficult social problems. I do not believe the state should be in the business of vengeance. Senator Neal's comments are still true today. But more importantly, so are the words of American revolutionist Dr. Benjamin Rush, one of the signers of our Declaration of Independence when he represented Pennsylvania. He stated in May of 1774, when a government puts one of its citizens to death, it exceeds the power entrusted to it. I ask for your support of AB 395. Thank you.
Thank you. There being no further remarks, Chief Clerk will open the room. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 26 ayes, 16 nays. The bill has received the constitutional majority. Declare passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 396, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, an act relating to peace officers, revising provisions relating to justifiable homicide, revising provisions relating to the use of deadly force to effectuate an arrest, and providing other measures properly thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 3, end of Section 3, end of bill.
The amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole.
There are none.
Remarks, Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The bill provides that peace officers, rather than officers, are authorized to use deadly force to effectuate an arrest. Furthermore, the peace officer, when using deadly force, must have probable cause to believe that a person has committed a felony involving the infliction or threat of serious bodily harm or the use of deadly force and poses an imminent threat of serious bodily harm to the peace officer or others.
Any further remarks? Assemblyman O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in strong opposition to AB 396. Mr. Speaker, order business 15.
Order business 15.
I, along with virtually all law enforcement, am concerned that this bill places undue limitations on a peace officer's ability to protect the public or themselves during extremely stressful situations. The word "and" in Section 2.1 precludes an officer from using deadly force unless the suspect has committed a felony which involves the infliction or threat of serious bodily harm or the use of deadly force, and 2, possesses an imminent threat of serious bodily harm to the peace officer or to others. Both conditions must exist, which places an almost Herculean decision to be made by the officer in quite literally a split second at times. I can attest to personally, as such serious and unnecessary consequences can and will occur. For this reason, I urge all of my colleagues to vote no on AB 396. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Assemblyman. There be no further remarks. Chief Clerk will open the room. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 26 ayes, 16 nays. Bill having received the Constitutional majority, declare passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 409, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, enacting peace officers, requiring the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission to adopt certain regulations concerning the recruitment and selection of peace officers and providing other matters properly named thereto. The people's state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
Are there amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks. Assemblywoman Dickman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 409 requires the Peace Officers Standards and Training Commission to adopt regulations concerning the recruitment and selection of peace officers, which must include evaluations to identify implicit bias on the part of a peace officer on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, physical or mental disability, sexual orientation, or gender identity or expression. This bill is effective October 1, 2021.
Any further remarks? There being none, the Chief Clerk will open the room. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 36 ayes, 6 nays. Bill having received the Constitutional majority, declare passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 421, introduced by the Committee on Legislative Operations and Elections, enacting to persons with certain conditions, establishing the preferred manner of referring to persons with mental illness and persons who are deaf or hard of hearing in the Nevada Revised Statutes and the Nevada Administrative Code, and providing other matters properly named thereto. The people's state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 4, end of Section 4, end of bill.
Are there amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks. Assemblywoman Brown-May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 421 establishes the preferred manner of referring to people with mental illness and people who are deaf or hard of hearing. The measure makes specific reference to what is considered the preferred language in Nevada Revised Statutes. In addition, the bill specifies that the Nevada Administrative Code must also use the preferred language and sentence structure when referring to people with mental illness and people who are deaf or hard of hearing.
Any further remarks? There being none, Chief Clerk will open the room. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. Bill having received the Constitutional majority, declare passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 214, introduced by Assemblywomen Considine and Krasner, an act relating to sexual assault, revising the definition of sexual assault by replacing gendered language with gender-neutral language and providing other matters properly named thereto. The people's state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, end of bill.
Are there amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks. Assemblywoman Considine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 214 revises the definition of sexual assault by replacing the gendered language in statute with gender-neutral language.
Any further remarks? There being none, the Chief Clerk will open the roll. Anyone wishing to change their vote? There are 40 ayes, 2 nays. Bill having received the Constitutional majority, declare passed and order transmitted to the Senate. I believe that concludes our general file. We'll go to order of business 15. Assemblyman O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to remind the body today that April is Donate Life Month. there are currently 110,000 men, women, and children who are awaiting a life-saving organ transplant in the United States. Another person is added to the waiting list every 10 minutes. 20 people die each day because the organ they need is not donated in time. A single person's organ donation can save 8 lives. A single cornea donation can restore sight to 2 individuals. A single person's tissue donation has the potential to heal the lives of 75 people. I would like to encourage my colleagues and all Nevadans to join with me in becoming an organ donor and offer the gift of life. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Assemblywoman Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Order of Business 15.
Order of Business 15.
Late last Friday, it was announced that the public would finally be allowed back into this building to fully participate in the legislative process in person. However, the rules and requirements established are so complex and convoluted that this building will effectively remain closed to most of the public. No similar draconian rules are being imposed to going into a grocery store, a casino, a restaurant, a bar, a drugstore, a convenience store, a mall, or any other public building. This session is now more than half over. Critical votes on important bills are being cast, yet we're forcing our constituents to jump through bureaucratic hoops simply to exercise their right to petition their government. This is not right. The People's House should be fully reopened to the public using the same safety precautions established for every other public building in the state. We are the people's servants, not the other way around.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Order of Business 15.
Order of Business 15.
Today marks the first day of Songkran, which is Thai New Year. Historically, this day is designed by visiting the temple and offering food to Buddhist monks and pouring water over statues. Water plays a huge role in our tradition and represents washing away sins and bad luck of the previous year. And although it may look different this year, Thailand celebrates this by having nationwide water fights, which is why this holiday is also known as the Water Festival. Across Thailand, each region celebrates this holiday with their own traditions, but center around spending time together with family and friends. I'm honored to be the first Thai woman elected in the state of Nevada, and my family celebrates by honoring our ancestors and our elders. And I would like to wish my colleagues a happy Songkran, and I also wanted to tell my grandmother thank you so much for making these beautiful masks for us to celebrate, because it does look different this year. So, khap kun mak ka. Thank you.
Assemblywoman Martinez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to say happy birthday to Carlos Hernandez, my attaché. He's a whopping 25 years old. So everybody come by, say hello. And Carlos, thank you for all your hard work, and more than anything, thank you for being my friend. Thank you.
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I believe we have another important birthday today. Our chief clerk is celebrating a birthday, and if we could give her a big round of applause. Of course, Chief Clerk, you know we celebrate you and thank you for all your hard work. We listen hard as you talk fast and move us through things, and you keep us organized in ways in which allow us to actually accomplish things in this building. And we thank you for all that and celebrate your years of life. I believe we have no other business before us, Mr. Speaker. All right. Seeing no other business before us, I move that the Assembly adjourn until Wednesday, April 14th, 2021 at the hour of 2 p.m.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. We are adjourned.